Well, it has been a long road for many Star Wars fans, and it has been a great number of years and countless videos across YouTube that have talked about when would Kathy Kennedy be departing Lucasfilm. Now, some of these rumors have been received with great adulation. Others have been met with skepticism and everything in between. What we try to do here is at least kind of parcel them out, look at them from a mathematical, a business, a financial perspective. Now, back in 2021, when this channel was just a few months old, of course, that was all the topic of conversation. Kathy Kennedy's contract was set to expire and potentially be renewed in October of last year. There was a lot of consternation over whether or not that would actually happen. And some people said it was definitely coming. Others were a little bit more skeptical, and as rumors started to abound, folks like WDW Pro and that Park Place came up with information that said it looked like she was going to be renewed to hold her around through the release and completion of Indiana Jones 5. That may still look to be the case, but we have some new information today for the audience to consider. And at the end of the day, that's all we can do is ask you to consider it. And that's all this is. Whether you think these rumors or this information are valid or not, that's not up to us. We can just present you with what we've heard and give it to you to ponder. And for that today, I've got my friend here, Kamran Pasha, which you can check out on his Patreon page. He has some news from a source that has been in fairly regular communication with him via his Patreon. Let's bring him in now. Kamran Pasha, welcome aboard.
Online.
Thank you so much, Valiant. It's always an honor to be on your channel, and it's exciting to be able to share with you the information that I received today that I've held for some time because I wanted to really be careful putting it out there until I felt confident. And I've had enough interaction now with the source to believe it. And so I put it out there on my Patreon today, and I'm delighted to be able to at least share this information with your audience to, as you said, come to their own conclusions, because this is information that is provided to me. This is not firsthand things. I have not seen these with my own eyes. I have not been present in the rooms where these conversations were held, but this is what is being reported to me by someone I've come to trust.
And that's all we can ask for with sources, right? And Pro is a regular guest on this channel on Sundays, especially with the live shows, as you have been. He has his sources that have talked about things from the toy industry to other things at Disney and everything in between, parks, all kinds of stuff, right? Some of these things turn out to be accurate, others not quite so much. But of course, time is always the enemy, right? As the information we get over time, that information can change, things can change, circumstances can change. And sometimes the information that a source delivers that they believe true and accurate at the moment, sometimes those things can alter with time. Things that we know about Kathleen Kennedy, forgetting all of the fan hatred and animosity towards her, taking that fandom hat off for a moment and just looking at it purely from a business perspective like we always have. One of the reasons why, we thought there's no way Kathy can hang around past that 2021 date is because up to that point, her management of Lucasfilm has, at the very least, been gross negligence from a financial perspective and from a management perspective. At worst, just complete incompetence. And by that, I mean, you've had 5 major motion pictures released from Lucasfilm under the Star Wars banner since Disney bought it for $4 billion in 2012. 3 out of those 5 motion pictures have had massive cost overruns because of complete and utter mismanagement on the part of Kathy Kennedy as studio head. And by that, I mean Rogue One. By that, I mean Solo. And by that, I mean The Rise of Skywalker, I more commonly refer to as The Rise of Palpatine. All of these movies were shot almost twice before they were released. Movies that had 60, 70, 80+% from all accounts that we've heard, completion, and then going back to the drawing board and a lot of things reshot. Matter of fact, recently our friend Script Doctor posted on Twitter in a conversation we were having, the lowest figure that he had ever heard in terms of the final production cost with the giant mess of Rise of Skywalker was $500+ million in production costs for that film before they spent a dime in marketing. The movie
So it might not have broken even.
No, they lost money. If that's true, they lost hundreds of millions on that film, which I honestly I can believe. We know they were reshooting that film just a few weeks before the release, and according to script, he had heard that post-production VFX was being rushed like you would not believe days before it opened in theaters. And again, we've heard that from not just him, but a number of sources, but I had never heard the figure. So this is the kind of mismanagement we're talking about. This is the kind of thing that would have suggested that by all accounts, there's no reason that this person would have stayed around, but for whatever may have been placed in her original contract at the time of sale between George Lucas and Robert Iger, who was chairman and CEO at the time, and of course is now again, or at least as CEO. And that deal was struck with Kathleen Kennedy being named as studio head of Lucasfilm, contract to be renewed every 3 years. And apparently, and we've jokingly said this in the past, short of her burning down Cinderella's castle, apparently she's not going anywhere. But as things came about last year, and Pro talked about this, a number of other sources talked about this, that something in her contract was keeping her around through Indiana Jones 5. Of course, this was her baby. This is the movie she really wanted to make, and she has been trying to make this film now for the last 10 years. So here we are at this point. And of course, our friend Doomcock has had some rumors in recent months that, quite frankly, appear to all be coming true. We've seen the trailer for Indiana Jones 5. It looks like pretty much everything that he's discussed up to this point that he had found out from his sources, the time travel, the young Indy, the old Indy, the whole interchange with him and Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character possibly claiming the mantle of Indiana Jones at the end of it. He had a new video in the last 24 hours that also seemingly confirmed that, with some other posts that he had found online. I tend to believe pretty much all of that, if not every word of it at this point. And this brings us to the topic today, how these tie together. And you have some brand new information that you've heard. I'm going to let you share it with the audience and let them decide, and we'll talk about this. But go ahead, Kamran. What have you heard about how this relates to Kathy Kennedy and her exit deal?
Okay. So first, let me just talk about my source, because that also relates to this. Okay. The information I'm getting is from an employee at Lucasfilm. I've been able to confirm the identity of this person and their status within the company, and they are in a position to know these things. Okay? So I was first brought the information from this source a few weeks ago relating to the talks when Bob Chapek was still CEO. It feels like it was an eternity, but it was at that time, just before the earnings call, that the information was first came to me through the source that apparently Bob Chapek had some very harsh words with Kathleen Kennedy over the initial screenings that were held, that they're denying, but there were screenings. There have to be screenings, and the test screenings were held, and apparently he was quite hard on her, and this person was familiar with what happened. And that's the first time that I had interaction then with this person. And other information has come out that I put on my Patreon. We'll talk about that in a separate video. But this information that I'm sharing was revealed to me a week ago. And I was very, very hesitant to put it out there. I've held it for a week. However, in that week, I've come to know more information that the source is giving that's confirmed stuff that I know, and I've heard now from other secondary sources that seem to line up with it. So I said, you know what, I'm going to risk it and put it out there. In the past, I've done this. When I received a message from one of my sources who works at Disney that there was a hiring freeze put in place, there was no evidence whatsoever that was in the case. I couldn't find it anywhere. I couldn't find anyone to support it. And I put it out there because I trusted this person. And I didn't hear anything for 2 days. And I said, okay, maybe I'm the sucker. Maybe I put out misinformation. And then 48 hours later, it was confirmed in the trades, what I had put out there. So we scooped the trade.
And you did have the scoop on that by 48 hours. There was no doubt. You put it out on your Patreon, and literally right at 2 days later, the layoffs and hiring freezes were announced.
Which
yes,
Bob,
indeed.
Yes. So which Bob Iger has now affirmed publicly he's going to continue with. So, and that relates to what we're talking about here. So now this information that I've held for a week, and I'm not choosing to put it out there, again, with the caveat that do not have direct firsthand knowledge. I've not seen the documents involved. I can only relay what this person has conveyed to me, who claims that they have. Right. And so this is the information that I've been received from this Lucasfilm employee, which is that apparently Kathleen Kennedy has reached a severance settlement with Disney. She has reached an agreement with Disney, according to this source, and he gave me specific information as to what is in that severance agreement. And if you're comfortable with it, I'll share what the numbers are.
Yeah, please.
The claim is that I've been given is that the severance contract that she has closed with Disney would give her between $25 to $30 million in a severance golden parachute payout to leave Disney. But my source said what's interesting is that a very substantial amount of it is in stock or stock options, to the point that my source actually made the comment that they were surprised. They were surprised at how large a part of that severance package was in stock. And we can have all kinds of theories as to why that's the case, but that certainly isn't outside the realm of how these kinds of arrangements are made. But that's
pretty normal.
Yeah, that's the breaking news that we have the claim of an actual closed severance agreement with Disney for her to depart in 2023 to the tune of $25 to $30 million, substantially in stock. And that my understanding is that she will be allowed to quietly remain the head of Lucasfilm for a few more months. And tying into what we were talking about, that the exit appears to be linked to Indiana Jones, which I understand June 30th, I believe, is the release date of Indiana Jones. And so theoretically, shortly thereafter, probably early July, maybe shortly after the whatever accolades they hope to get out of Indiana Jones, which may or may not exist, but whatever press they can get out of it, they will then announce her retirement, at least present it as her retiring on her golden laurels of whatever the numbers end up being with Indiana Jones. So I've held this for 1 week. I've heard from one other source that I will share that, and again, this is something that I cannot confirm with my own eyes, but the reason I decided to share is that a second source then came to me in the past few days and said that they were talking to a reporter at the trades, at one of the trades, who says, no, we have received the information that Kathleen Kennedy has reached a closing deal, but we are not being permitted to reveal it. I guess, as a trade,
and when you
often hold back information at the request of the studios.
Yeah, and just to clarify for the audience's sake, when you say that another source at one of the trades had
another source who spoke to a reporter at the trades, who knows them directly, right?
Right, and we talk about the trades. I just want to say, when Kamran says the trades, we're talking about the major trade publications in Hollywood. We're talking about publications like Deadline, The Hollywood Reporter, Variety Magazine. Puck, you could throw them in there as well, I guess.
Hollywood Reporter, those kinds of publications.
Yeah. So again, so it's out there. And again, the reason you called me this afternoon and filled me in on this and said, hey, let's get together and talk about this on a video. I said, it's interesting. Yeah. And you're laying out the details, and I said, yeah, I can see how this works. I can see how this makes sense. And look, and again, going back to what WDW Pro said a year and a half ago at this point, that Kennedy's retirement seemingly was being tied to this Indiana Jones 5 movie. So I think a lot of eyes have been focusing in on this. And again, one of the things that you and I both have been consistent on, along with many others, Kathleen Kennedy was never, ever going to get fired.
Correct.
Using that word. She was never going to be humiliated, marched out, and all kind of stuff. I never thought that. I thought her contract would not be renewed, and she'd be, as it should have been by every business metric that we covered earlier in the video. It makes absolute sense. Look at what David Zaslav just did to Warner Brothers Discovery.
Yep.
Look at what he did to the entire Warner Brothers Studios. Look what he did to DC.
He just totally played the part because it was business sense. Yeah.
Everybody was released and relieved of duty. Kathleen Kennedy has arguably done far worse than Walter Hamada has done. They have not put a single production or a single movie into pre-production in 5 or 6 years at this point, into pre-production. That's a travesty. Now, they've talked about a lot of things. None of them have worked out, and they've all seemed to be kind of, nonsense like Rogue Squadron. That's more of a Patty Jenkins issue. That's a whole other conversation we want to have today. But that being said, This deal to me makes a lot of sense. They would want to exit her positively on a quote unquote high note. We can debate about what we may think of the final product that is Indiana Jones 5 and the Dial of Destiny. But that being that as it may, this is supposed to be Kathy's swan song. Makes sense. She wants to go out on this movie. Makes sense. She's going to be 70 years old. She will have just turned 70 years old when this movie releases. There's a lot of things that line up to this. Now, whether or not it happens is another story. But again, I think all of it is, to me, very plausible. And that's why I wanted to have the discussion and let the audience listen to it and decide for themselves. But they obviously do need to move on. Iger has never been happy with her performance, which is why he, put the brakes hard on Star Wars films.
People forget that.
The disaster of Solo.
Iger's her protector. Well, during the final couple years of his reign, he wasn't protecting her that much. He publicly put the kibosh on greenlighting any more films, and then put Jon Favreau in charge of this television stuff. That doesn't show a lot of confidence on his part. Right. No, and it's and I'm not trying to sit here that to say that Iger is wonderful at Disney. He's not. We've had this conversation. I don't want to rehash it. Yep. But when it comes to protecting Kennedy, the more I've observed, the less I think he's a very much of a fan of hers. So let's talk about the specifics of this deal real quick, in closing, because a lot of this makes sense. And the reason why you would want to offer something like stock options is, number one, it's not as if Disney is very, cash fat right now. Most companies aren't, given the circumstances in the economy. Of course, Disney has burned through a lot of cash with DTC, direct-to-consumer streaming services like Disney Plus. And of course, one of the biggest expense line items on Disney Plus's quarterly reports, if they were to go into this detail, but one of the reasons they lose $1 billion a quarter plus is because they have to write checks to studios like Marvel and Lucasfilm especially to produce all these shows. You think about what we've had recently. You've had Andor, you have had Book of Boba Fett, and you have had Obi-Wan Kenobi just this year. Each of those shows probably had a $200 million something price tag to it. Yeah. That has to come from somewhere, and it comes from Disney Plus. And of course, Disney Plus is far from being profitable. It was never scheduled to be profitable until sometime in fiscal year 2024, 2 years from now. So we still have a ways to go, but there's nothing coming out in the theaters. We know the Star Wars toys just don't sell. The only thing actually at Lucasfilm, and I'm talking about new stuff, Mando and Grogu, yes. Sequel trilogy toys, nope, and never really have. The only thing that's really generating money from third-party sources and third-party licensing for Lucasfilm is classic Star Wars toys. Their deals with companies like Mattel or Hasbro or Legos, T-shirt manufacturers and all this kind of stuff. That third-party licensing is still a good revenue driver. Apart from that, there's nothing else. Willow, Samba TV release numbers on that. It has to be one of the worst performing shows ever on Disney Plus. Yeah. Less than 500,000 U.S. households watched Willow, according to Samba TV, in the first 5 days. 5 days. The CW does better than that.
Yeah, couldn't even break 500,000 views. That is atrocious. And again, not that Samba is the end-all be-all measurement. The numbers may have been actually higher. But like I always talk about, Samba TV is an interesting metric when you compare it to other Samba TV measurements. And by that, what I mean is, for example, if you look at House of the Dragon, Samba TV measured almost 5 million households in the first 3 or 5 days of that show on HBO Max. You're talking about a tenth or less for this show on Disney Plus. And another show that Lucasfilm probably spent $150, $200 million producing. These are very, very expensive shows. Everything Disney does tends to be more expensive. So everything says that there needs to be some major changes at Lucasfilm. And we've seen things recently like Michelle Rejwan call it forcibly resigned or stepping down or what have you.
And many people thought she was going to be the successor to Kathleen Kennedy. And so her resignation still remains a mystery. I don't think we've come across a real reason as to why she was let go. And there's been a lot of mysteries the last few weeks with why people are being let go at Disney, but that remains one.
And we may one day find out, but I think the stock options from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And the reason it makes a lot of sense is because it's something that it doesn't really impact the cash flows of Disney, that they have to turn over a check for cash to Miss Kennedy. There will be some cash, don't get me wrong, retirement packages.
Yeah, he didn't claim there was no cash. He was just surprised at the percentage of stock in the deal.
Right. And it kind of makes sense because it's stock or stock options. It may not all be vested at one time. It may be something that slowly vests over the course of 3, 4, 5, 6 years.
Yeah.
That's a possibility. Deferred income, Section 162 of the Internal Revenue Code, for example, deferred income type things. You can do that with what effectively is like a pensionized buyout over the course of a few years with these stock options, to where every year she'll receive some of it. Every year she'll pay taxes on that. That portion of the stock she receives or the options she receives. If it's options, she can choose when to exercise, or it may be forced exercise. There's all kind of things you can put into this. So, and this is why potentially I think there's a fluctuation on that value, whether it's 20 million, 25 million, or 30 million, of course, is going to depend largely upon what do you believe that stock is going to be worth when she's vested in it. Sure. And just like with Lucas, a big portion of Lucas's purchase deal back in 2012 for Lucasfilm, there was a significant amount in that $4 billion, a significant amount of Disney stock. Not terribly surprising, but I think the terms of this make a lot of sense because, again, I think the bottom line for me is Kathy wants to go out on a high note. That's a great way to do it. Indiana Jones, regardless of what we think of it, is probably still going to do fairly well at the box office. It's got the name Harrison Ford on it. And he's playing his title character. I think short of the movie being a complete disaster and the audience is tearing it apart hard after the first weekend, which is entirely possible, folks, based on what we've heard. Hopefully they'll be changing that, since Doomcock has apparently really got him rattled from what we've seen.
Yeah, and if my source is correct that Bob Iger did have this ugly conversation with Kathleen Kennedy, I mean, the smart thing to do is you still got a few months, at least re-edit, reshoot something, fix whatever you got to. Peter Jackson was still fixing stuff in King Kong days before its release, right? And I loved King Kong. Not everyone did. I loved King Kong, but he was still editing and doing things literally like 2 or 3 days before it was in the theaters. So they got time. I would suggest that they use it.
Yeah, indeed. They do have time, and I think it's one of the reasons we've talked about this before, why they delayed this movie an additional year. I think, none the least of which was the extensive amount of post-production VFX and CGI work that this movie was going to entail. And obviously what we saw in the trailer for this film, there were certain shots in there that looked like they still needed a lot of work. It was a little surprising that they even put those in the trailer to begin with. But that being said, look, Lucasfilm has from what all we've heard, has kind of gone on let's call it a lockdown. They're being very cautious. They are monitoring a lot of emails, phones, things like this.
But that was also confirmed by my source today in a phone conversation I had that let's just say there's a lot of upset inside of Lucasfilm at the Kathleen Kennedy level as to leaks and information. So my source is actually putting themselves a little bit on the line because there's been some confrontations inside the company about this issue.
Yeah, and we've heard that from a number of different places, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact you got to wonder that if all these rumors about Indiana Jones 5 were just complete bupkis, number one, why then did the trailer seem to at least tacitly confirm a lot of what we've heard up to this point, especially with the time travel issue in young Indy, old Indy? That was a big part of it, and that seems to be there. But then why the concern, why the worry inside Lucasfilm, why the crackdown if a lot of this isn't at least largely true? And there may be some nuances that will change between now and then. Let's hope they will. But any case, we'll see. Kamran, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, I mean, I just want to raise. I mean, the number itself does not. It seems realistic. 20 to it's 25 to 30 million. I believe the current reports are that's approximately what Bob Chapek was given to be released after just 1 year, really, as the acting CEO. This woman's been around. She's been running this studio for over a decade, and so I think that number. If the source had come and said she had been given a $50 million deal or more, I would have said that doesn't seem like a probable number. And I just want to get your analysis of that. I think that number seems about right for this person.
I think given the fact that the value that you're speaking of and what your source alluded to was that there was a significant amount of stock and or stock options in it, then yes. And I'm sure Chapek's buyout would have included a good bit of that. We don't know for sure. I mean, whatever the figure was for Chapek might have just been largely cash, and there may have been stock in addition to that. We don't know. And again, the problem is with this,
if he was removed for some kind of issue, not for cause, but some kind of thing that obviously required him to remove very quickly, you'd want to give him cash to make him go away as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and the same kind of thing here. And Kennedy will be lauded with a myriad of awards. She'll be on stage at the Oscars in 2024 with a Lifetime Achievement. We've talked about all this before. Whenever it happens, if it does indeed happen in 2023, if it does indeed happen shortly after Indiana 5, or maybe even into October of next year, which is, if she was renewed in October of 2021, she usually gets renewed in Octobers, folks. Then she may be around until October of 2023, and then that'll be it. But I mean, again, it goes to the point now at this, so many of her projects, everything she has touched here in the last few years have been sidelined, canceled. There's been we've lost count of how many projects that she has alluded to, saying that we're coming, we're working on it, all the way back to a Rian Johnson trilogy. None of these things have ever come to a fruition. Why then do you keep the studio head around? What is the point? Now, you've got to find somebody to replace her. And of course, that will be the next conversation that we have. Start theorizing that who might come in to run this ship. Will it look like a DC, where you have somebody like a James Gunn, who is a creative, and a Peter Safran, who's, more, I guess, the business-minded type person? Maybe that's what Lucasfilm needs as well. Who knows? But we'll talk more about that. Kamran, thank you for being here and sharing this with us. Make sure you check out Kamran Pasha on Patreon. Make sure you check out WDW Pro. He's got a new YouTube channel. We'll get launching on January 1st. You heard us announce that on the Sunday live show. But thank you all for being here tonight, folks. And until next time, take care.